Want to welcome back Sidney Hemming. Sidney is a geochemistry researcher at Lamont. She's done several Earth class programs for us in the past, and very pleased that we were able to get her again. Sid, your co-host, so whenever you want to get your presentation,
Okay.
you
Okay.
can share.
Yeah.
And
Well, first, yeah.
Christine is going to start the recording.
Okay. I think she did.
Okay.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for having me. I've always enjoyed the Earth to class and particularly the interactions. And so, with Zoom, it's harder to tell if somebody's wanting to ask a question. So just break in if you have a question and let's not let it sort of sit before you forget it.
You can also go down to reaction at the bottom.
Yeah, but
Raise your.
I might not notice it. So I think if you don't if somebody doesn't holler, I probably won't notice.
Okay, I'll keep a watch on it also.
Okay. And then I just want to say if any of I think the last time I did one of these was in 2021, and it was also about Antarctica and the ice sheet history as seen from the sedimentary record. So some of the background material that I'm going to be showing will be repeated from that, but it's work in progress, and so it'll be new research results that I'm showing today. Anyway, do feel free to break in and interrupt at any time.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody can see this?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I got to move things away so I can. The little pictures are in my way, making it even harder for me to tell. So holler. Anyway, so what I'm going to be talking about today is trying to understand the glacial history from the area called Iceberg Alley, which I'll show in more detail, but it's this area right out here outside of the Weddell Sea using marine sediments. And most specifically, I'm going to be centering this on an International Ocean Discovery Expedition 382 that I sailed on in 2019. Just got to find the arrow. Okay, so just to sort of set the stage a little bit, everybody knows Antarctica is centered on the South Pole and is largely covered by ice. And this set of graphics is just sort of putting together the picture of the background for Antarctica and a little bit the motivation as well. So the gray areas shown on this top map are the areas that are covered by ice, and the yellow areas are parts of the ice sheet where the subglacial elevation is below sea level, and then the blue areas are the ice shelves around Antarctica. And all of those things are really kind of important to the story. And then in addition, one of the things that at least I have found to be the most challenging aspect of studying Antarctica is the geography is just, different. And so the geographic place names are also shown here around the perimeter. I'm going to talk about mostly this area around the Weddell Sea. I'll definitely refer to the east and the west Antarctic ice sheets, and I'll say a little bit more about that from several different vantage points. But this Filchner-Ronne ice shelf is also particularly important and relevant for what I'm going to be talking about today. So the bottom left shows the modern bedrock elevations, uh, subglacial elevations below sea level. The scale bar is shown here to the right-hand side. So the deeper blue purple colors are the deepest below sea level. But you can see that much of West Antarctica is in this blue color. And so that's one of the reasons why um, scientists are particularly concerned about the vulnerability of the West Antarctic ice sheet because so much of its base is below sea level. And then on the right-hand side here is the thickness above flotation, right? So the gray is the part of Antarctica where the subglacial elevation is sea level or above, and then the thickness of the ice essentially above that subglacial sub-sea level elevation is shown in colors where the bright reds are really thick and the blues and purples are much thinner ice. So you can see that West Antarctica, in the middle of this very deep part of West Antarctica, there's relatively thick ice on the order of one,
Mm.
1.5 kilometers, and that there are some really, really thick areas of ice in East Antarctica that are above flotation. So East Antarctica is estimated to hold about 52 meters of sea level equivalent with ice that is on the average of 3 to 4 kilometers thick. And it's mostly, although you can see not entirely, grounded above sea level. And in contrast, West Antarctic ice sheet is much smaller. It's only about 5 meters of sea level equivalent. And the ice thickness is mostly on the order of 1 to 2 kilometers, but it's mostly grounded below sea level, and that's the reason why the West Antarctic ice sheet is a concern. And part of that concern is also tied to ocean circulation, which I won't talk about so much now, but one of the reasons why the ice being below sea level is so important is that if you have warm subsurface waters coming up underneath the ice shelf, then it actually sort of melts or erodes the ice shelf and therefore works towards destabilizing the ice sheet. So I'm really going to divide this into kind of two or three broad themes. And the first one, I'm going to talk about a project that we have funded to look at the evidence from this expedition 382 for the variability of the Antarctic ice sheet from the viewpoint of the Weddell embayment and the Antarctic Peninsula. And all these things I'm going to be talking about actually involve a large number of collaborators, and I'll try to be careful to call out others, the contributions of others as I go through this. Oh, and this is a little batch of penguins on an iceberg, and this photograph actually came from our expedition 382, where we had to leave our site a few times to move over and let icebergs go by. So
Mm.
it really is Iceberg Alley.
Mm.
Okay, so in order to use the marine sediment record the way I want to basically harness the marine evidence for ice sheet changes in the past, there's a few things we have to know or infer about the conditions and processes both on land and in the sea. And a really important first step is how are sediments entrained into the ice and how far do they travel? And so there's not one answer for that. There's multiple answers, but the figure on the top left here is gives an indication of maybe one relatively common way that sediment gets picked up and moved in under the ice. So the bluish color stuff on the top is the ice flowing across a um, topographic change, and as the ice is moving, it has ice caught up, rocks caught up in the bottom, and they're basically abrading and crushing and grinding down the rock. And as the ice flows across the topographic change, there's basically a plucking effect on the upstream side and a um, and a deposition effect on the downstream side. And so that is one of the places where we get a decent amount of sediment caught up in within the ice. And if you've looked at the glacial geology in Central Park,
Yeah.
you've seen the rock expression of this, where you see sort of much more polished and rounded surfaces on the upstream side, and craggy, jagged surfaces on the downstream side. And then frequently you'll see the big glacial erratics deposited sort of right on the downstream side of where you have a sort of a craggy surface. Um, so if we want to, we're going to use the sediment record offshore to try to say where did the ice originate that calved into the ocean as an iceberg. And so what we're um, depending on is that there be something that's got an indication of where it came from that gets picked up into the ice, moved offshore, moved downstream, and then eventually um, calves off into the ocean. So the bottom left here is a photograph from the IODP core repository of some sediment core, a core that's been cut up into sections. And one thing you can see on there is the more yellow colors and interlayered with the more gray colors, right? So the more gray colors are richer in silt and clay. Those are the glacial rich intervals, and the more beige colored materials are more rich in biosilica, diatoms and radiolaria and things like that. And those are the more interglacial conditions. And then if we look at this block diagram cartoon on the right-hand side, the sort of mechanism we're looking for is that this sediment that we described above here on the left is being picked up, and it comes from different geological terrain. So the colors on these nunataks sticking up from the ice are geological, different geological terrains, and they leave an imprint in the minerals that rocks and minerals that constitute them. And then when those get picked up and dropped into the ocean, we core down into the ocean, examine the abundance of coarse fraction, as we call it, ice rafted detritus, or I'll probably slip into IRD for ice rafted detritus. We examine the abundance of that, and we examine geological, or in my case, geochronological evidence for where it came from in Antarctica. And so another thing that's really important to take into account for the interpretation of ice rafted detritus is how far do the icebergs travel and how much sediment do they carry? How rich are they in the debris that they can drop into the ocean as they melt? And this is a numerical modeling exercise. I'll show you some real observations of icebergs in a moment, but this is a modeling exercise that was published a few years ago, and the different colors on this map are different classes of icebergs. That, by class I mean size of icebergs, where the very large icebergs are the ones in the purple colors, and the smaller ones are in the turquoise colors. And one thing, if it's not something you already know, one thing that is important to note is that there's a counter current that flows counterclockwise around Antarctica that's basically driven by the katabatic winds blowing off the Antarctica continent. And that current is the main carrier of icebergs around Antarctica. And then on the outside, there's the strongest ocean current in the world's ocean is the Antarctic circumpolar current, which is centered about where I'm pointing with the pointer now. Obviously squeezes down and comes through the Drake Passage. And so icebergs calve off the margins. They're carried counterclockwise by this counter current. And then when they come to an embayment, such as the Weddell, the Ross, and the Pritz Bay embayment, they essentially kind of get caught up in the gyres from those embayments and shoot off into the Antarctic circumpolar current. And this is particularly well developed in the Weddell Sea, partly because of the sort of squeezed down Drake Passage area, and partly because of the very broad embayment here from the Weddell Sea. So you can see that there's a real track of pink going out into the Antarctic circumpolar current. and then following around. And this area that's particularly dark is the area that's called Iceberg Alley. And in the Wet LC sector, there's been a lot of coring, particularly by the Germans from the Alfred Wegener Institute and the British Antarctic Survey. There have been a lot of piston and gravity cores taken. And this is an example from the polar sterns of German ship of a core located about here, right inside the Weddell Sea, but close to Iceberg Alley. And the left-hand side is the percent radiolarian. So the high percent radiolarian is the high biosilica, like the yellow that I showed you, and low is the more silty interval. And you can see that there's pattern of increases and decreases in the radiolarians, which this group has used to create a time scale for this variation. And these letters over here, 1, 5E, 7A to C, and 7E, those are the marine isotope stages. These are the interglacial intervals that have been designated. And one of the things that's really kind of an important observation from these, just looking at trying to understand the environmental information that's preserved by ice rafted detritus, is that the abundance of IRD tends to be greater at the same time as the percent of radiolarians is greater. In other words, when you're near Antarctica, the abundance of ice rafted detritus is greater during warmer times. So when it's too cold, the ice shelves are really well developed. They filter the sediment so it doesn't get out into the main ocean currents. And so therefore, the ice rafted detritus is actually generally lower during cold glacial times. Okay, and then this is an X radiograph that's actually from that same core. This is from 357 centimeters in that core, and in this radiograph, it's a reverse color, so the dense parts are whiter, and the less dense parts are darker, and so these white spots that you see on this X radiograph are relatively large grains of rock, pebbles or sand grains of rock. I think they can see fragments that are coarser than 1 millimeter, but some of these are clearly quite a bit coarser than 1 millimeter. And then what we do is we take a sample of this sediment, which even the part that's rich in ice rafted detritus is mostly mud. So we take a sample of this mud, we dry it, and then we weigh it so that we know what the total weight of the dry weight of the sediment is. And then we disaggregate it in water, pass it through a 63 micron sieve, and we save all the fractions and use them for different things. But I'm going to be really focusing on the sand fraction, and I'm usually focusing on the fraction that's coarser than 250 micrometers, 0.25 millimeters. So this, you can see here, this is a 5 millimeter scale bar. And most of the white stuff you see in here is quartz, but you see some bright colors, pinks, those are feldspars, and the blacks are biotites and hornblends. And then from that sample, we would pick the grains that we that are hornblende, which are black to green, sometimes brown, and they have a distinct luster, and also the cleavage is really diagnostic. So we pick as many hornblende grains as we can to do argon geochronology on those. And then even though the grains all look the same as each other, their ages are not necessarily the same. And so this is actually not from the same interval that this photo is from. This photo is from 357, and the sample that I'm showing here is from 817 to 819 centimeters. But you can see that there's a variety of different geological ages represented in these hornblendes. So this is a histogram number of measured ages on the y-axis and the geological age from 0 to 1,500 million years or 1.5 billion years on the x-axis. And what you can see is something that's really quite common in the region of the Weddell Sea. You see this sort of pink color is in the range of about 100 million years. Then there's a really rather strong abundance of grains that are in this sort of 400 to 600 million years, really centered on 500 million years. And then this is actually bigger than usual proportionally, but there's also not uncommonly a significant amount of approximately 1 billion year grains, which, by the way, the Grenville is what the Adirondacks are. So the Grenvillian is a enormous an enormous mountain complex that was produced as a result of the coalescing of the continents during Rodinia. And so it's found in all the continents, and there's a significant amount of Grenville in several places around Antarctica as well. And so most of the time, I'm going to be presenting the data on pie charts. So these same data shown here on the histogram are shown to the left here on a pie chart. And Trevor Williams is the one who has done basically the artwork for this. He's the one that, and I apologize if you're colorblind because I understand that these colors are not colorblind friendly. But he's derived a template that basically puts the ages as colors on a pie chart, so we can truncate the data and look at it together. And then another thing that's really important to consider is what are the environmental conditions that lead to higher or lower abundance of ice rafted detritus? I'm sorry, it looks like I've got this label cut off a little bit here. And as I mentioned in that previous diagram from the polar stern core, the IRD tends to be concentrated in the interglacials, but it's not perfectly that way. And this is an sort of an opportunity that Trevor took when the new X-ray instrument that was built for the JOIDES resolution was at the repository at Texas A&M. He took advantage of the fact that the Antarctic IODP cores are stored there, and he took a lot of X radiographs, really for for a number of purposes, but the main goal was to examine this question of where is the ice rafted detritus concentrated with respect to the abundance of biosilica. And so you can see that these lighter, in this case, black is dense and white is not dense. So it's opposite of the other photograph I showed you. But you can see that there's a general tendency for the black spots to be concentrated where the background is much lighter. It's not perfectly that way. For example, over here on the right, you see these laminations and you see plenty of ice rafted grains that are not in the lightest colored interval. But there's a general tendency for there to be more abundance of IRD during warmer times.
Is the biosilica skeletal material from organisms?
Yes, it
Okay.
is. It's mostly diatoms.
Okay.
And there's also typically when there's abundant diatoms, there are also abundant radiolarians. So
So very,
diatoms are algae, and radiolarians are protist, um, single-celled organisms.
and these are very temperature sensitive.
They are that there's that and the different species are have different temperature sensitivities. And my understanding is that the high abundance of biosilica is in the Antarctic environment is aided by a fairly big seasonal contrast where there's sea ice in the winter and then that sea ice melts in the summer. but that there's open water conditions in the summer. That's my understanding is the place where the people that study the fossils themselves um, find the greatest abundance. And there's some really, in fact, Mike, if you're looking for people, one of the people I sailed with on 382, Jonathan Warnack, is a diatom specialist who's at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and he's done an extraordinary amount of work on the same cores that we've been working on, the ice rafted detritus, and he has divided it up into sea ice favoring diatoms and open ocean diatoms, and I can't even remember what all the various environmental parameters that he's able to sort of diagnose with these, but he's counted a rather extraordinary number of samples, and a really kind of neat record is emerging. And then on top of that, another person who sailed on the expedition has been using organic geochemistry biomarkers. And so Jonathan and Michelle have a joint study where they have both the apparent temperature from a proxy called Tex 86 as a geochemical organic geochemical proxy, and the diatom information together. We're gonna, in the end, this expedition is going to yield a really impressive multiple proxy examination of how things work in terms of the combined history of Antarctic ice sheet and environmental conditions around Antarctica.
Sounds good. I'll try to get in touch with him for next year.
Okay.
We've also had Stephanie give a talk.
Stephanie was also on the same expedition, and yeah, I should have checked to make sure I'm not overlapping too much with
No,
Stephanie.
it's been
Anyway,
far enough
yeah,
away, so this
yeah.
is all good new stuff.
All right, good. So another thing that we have to consider for at least the part of the study that I'm excited about is, are there things about the debris that we can use to constrain where they came from? And so this is a geological map of Antarctica that Kathy Licht and I put together for a review paper we published a few years ago. And so there's a few things on here. I'm going to sort of try to take you through it, but the colors mostly around the perimeter of Antarctica are the very sparse outcrops of rock around Antarctica. So Antarctica is about 98% covered by ice, and so there's just scraps, mostly right around the very perimeter that are, provide the hints of what's underneath the ice sheet. But you can see from the sort of legend on the left here, and for our purposes, it's interesting but not required that be able to relate a color to a particular geological age. But note that different ages are different colors, and we have a big variety around the perimeter of Antarctica. The other thing that's on this map is the elevation. So again, you can see the very low elevations in the West Antarctic ice sheet and under the Wilkes and Aurora subglacial basins. And the brown lines on here are the glacial divides. So just like rivers, ice flows downhill and between divides. And of course, it flows more slowly and is less constrained to valleys than, or at least continental ice is less constrained to valleys. But it has the same principle that it's flowing downhill. And the brown represents the divides between the major catchments that are flowing out into the ocean. And not shown on this diagram, but the ice is flowing towards the ocean from all catchments, but most of the ice is flowing very, very slowly. So most of the ice that gets to the ocean is flowing through ice streams. Okay, so I showed you the geology around Antarctica, and the colors from this are not Trevor's colors. This is just from the Quantarctica. It's an ArcGIS compilation of Antarctic geology, so it doesn't match the colors. I'll show you something that matches the colors more closely later. But this is an animation that was put together by Marlo Gansworthy, who was the outreach officer, one of the outreach officers for Expedition 382. And what they first did was to document the sort of animation of icebergs from 1976 to I think it was 2018. We sailed in 2019, so it's a little less than to 2019. And they first had it as white spots, but knowing that I was really curious about where the icebergs came from that ended up at, in the end on the spots, they kindly put together a version that used the color coding that is shown around the perimeter here to tag an iceberg. So if an iceberg calved off from here, it would be dark blue, and it would stay dark blue, and it would end up as this dark blue spot in the last observation of where that iceberg was. So I'm going to run this video or this animation so you can sort of watch what happens. And by the way, these icebergs are coming from ice shelves and may not even have any ice rafted detritus in them. This is just watching what the icebergs do. We're 2017, just watching what the icebergs do. And these yellow spots up here are actually where our drilling sites were. So you can see that, as I mentioned, that mostly the ice, when the icebergs first fall off the margin, they follow that counter current, and then when they get to one of the embayments, they get spun out into the Antarctic circumpolar current a bit. Larsen B was that big ice shelf that broke off in the Weddell Sea, and so a lot of the green, probably at least half of the green spots in here are from Larsen B ice shelf. Okay, so now that it's ended, we can look back and see what the colors for the last place where the iceberg was observed. What part of the margin did it come from? And so you can see a couple of important things. One of them is that for the most part, there's not a huge separation between where the iceberg came off the margin and where it melted, right? You can see that there's a lot that's clustered kind of around the margin, and the colors aren't so different from the colors of the painted margin, right? But you can also see that there are a lot of icebergs that got far away from the margin, and that even if you look up here in the Weddell Sea, you can see a lot of green. That's the local sources, a pretty good bit of brown, which is pretty local, but you can also see basically all the other colors. And if you were watching closely, you probably noticed that there were a couple of icebergs that sort of came up from over here on the West Antarctic side and directly made their way into this iceberg alley. But most of the icebergs follow the counter current and then basically get spun out into the open ocean at the embayments. Okay, so this is a relatively up-to-date compilation of the data that we've been collecting over, it's got to be approaching 20 years now, around Antarctica. So we started out with a set of 30 cores around the perimeter just to kind of diagnose whether we could see variations. And one thing led to the other. And now we have really pretty a large amount of data. There's been a bit of a snowball effect that, the combination of finding interesting things in records that cause us to go back and look more closely at a particular region. So there's been some iteration back and forth. But the bar over here on the right side is the color index. And I apologize again if you're colorblind. I can take you through, and I'm happy to sort of back off and try to explain in some way besides colors about this. But the young ages are concentrated in West Antarctica. And the perimeter of East Antarctica has a huge amount of approximately 500 million year grains, almost everywhere you look, around the Weddell Sea, across droning Maudland, into Pritz Bay. There's a lot of orange and red. And they're two, and down here in the Ross Sea area. And there's two sort of major geological events in Antarctica that occurred about that time. There's the Pan-African orogeny. That was basically the huge mountain building event at about 600 million years. And then there was also the Ross orogeny, which was a subduction zone from Pacific Plate subducting under Antarctica. And both of those were, the Ross is slightly younger than the Pan-African, but they're basically contemporaneous mountain events. On this Wilkes Delhi land margin, there's a lot of dark blue and turquoise. This is the part of Antarctica that was connected to Australia during the Pan-African orogeny, and therefore these rocks were not overprinted mountain building events in the Pan-African, and their ages are older. So the dark blue is on the order of 1.6 billion years, and the turquoise is on the order of 1.2 billion years. So this is another a Grenville terrain in here. There's some Grenville in this area, Wilkes Land. There's some Grenville in the Pritz Bay area, and there's some Grenville over in the Weddell Sea. So there's not like one age, one geographic region, but the pattern of ages is relatively diagnostic. And then one really kind of cool observation is over here in the droning Maudland region, where we have a 3 billion year terrain called the Grunehogna, groundhog terrain. And you can see that 3 billion year ages in the hornblende ages as well. So we have, it's not like a fingerprint in the sense that any age you get is unique, but we have we can clearly distinguish East Antarctica from West Antarctica, and we can distinguish important sectors of East Antarctica from each other by using these chronological ages. All right, and then I want to just show about the ice streams and about the sort of draining of Antarctica. This is a movie that was put together for a paper by College et al. in 2014, and it goes from 25,000 years ago to the present. And again, the dark blue in this is very, very slow. These are the divides that I called out previously. And the bright colors are the fast-flowing ice. So the ice streams that are draining the Antarctic margin. And so you can see, you can kind of recognize this as Antarctica, but it looks a little bloated. So this is the last glacial maximum. More ice there then than there is now. And so a few things that I think are really cool about this are that you can see the change in the shape of the margin as a result of the changes in the ice over that time. But also notice the ice streams. They are not always in the same place throughout this interval of change from the last glacial maximum to present. All right, so let me run this. So it's almost like you see the ice streams kind of come in and gut a particular area, and then the ice kind of comes and goes. It's not monotonically decreasing throughout this interval. There's intervals where it actually grows back a little bit as well. But you can see that, and then this is essentially today's configuration. So people are aware of the Kuwait's Pine Island glacier catchments in the Amundsen Sea area. That's these catchments right here. Okay, so one of the things that makes people like me excited is knowing that there are these different ice streams that are operating throughout changes in the ice sheet, and so maybe we could use the sort of sequence of change of sediment sources throughout an interval to understand more about how the ice is changing with time. And in the Iceberg Alley area, shown here in the yellow spots and up here in this little inset, you can see the same sort of tracks of iceberg observations with the locations of our course indicated. And this is a paper. This is from a paper by Michael Weber, who was one of the co-chief scientists and the lead proponent for Expedition 382, and really an important basis for the project getting selected was these observations that Michael and his collaborators made about a Marion Dufresne core. These are just piston cores. They don't go as deep as we were able to go in the expedition, but they show the sort of termination, the change, the transition between the last glacial and the Holocene. And so the bottom line here is, or the bottom graph here, is the Scotia Sea iceberg rafted detritus flux, shown here in the black lines and the bars representing the average flux from his study. And he's also got several examples from other sites around the world, including the ice cores and different different marine records from mostly from the Southern Ocean. And then on the top here is data, oxygen isotope data from North Greenland. This stands for North Greenland. North Greenland. Can't remember what IP stands for, but this is the North Greenland Ice Project. I think Ice Core Project. I think. Anyway, you can see that there are some dramatic variations in the record from Greenland, and what Mike Weber has done is to connect variations in the ice rafted detritus from the Weddell Sea to some of these big changes in climate from the Northern Hemisphere. And importantly, he was really targeting the meltwater pulses, the big sea level pulses during the general transition from low sea level in the glacial to high sea level today. At the transition, there were several sort of abrupt, more dramatic increases in sea level, and there's a big debate in the community about to attribute where that water that led to the meltwater pulse came from. And interestingly, the people who work in the Southern Hemisphere want it to be the Northern Hemisphere, and the people that work in the Northern Hemisphere want it to be the Southern Hemisphere. And maybe they're sort of starting to come together, but there's still, quite a bit of back and forth, but among the researchers about where the water actually came from. And Mike's contention from this correlation is that there is a substantial peak in ice rafted detritus associated with the time of meltwater pulse 1A, one of those big increases, and therefore he attributes the East Antarctic ice sheet as being a significant contributor to that sea level rise. So that makes the understanding where the ice rafted detritus in that site came from really important. And Trevor Williams led a project that Kathy Licht and I were part of, and Stephanie Brockfeld, to go into the Weddell Sea embayment and collect till samples to allow us to better characterize what would be coming into the ocean from icebergs dropping out of the Weddell Sea sector. And so this is a picture of that Trevor took of Kathy Licht and me, on basically a thrusted till sheet, at the foundation ice stream, flowing off here to the left-hand side. And this is a paper that has come from that study from a student with Kathy Licht. And so the geology, the geological map of outcrops is shown here in the symbols. The ice streams are shown as the little tongues going up into the ice sheet. And this is the ice shelf that I mentioned. The Ronnie Filchner ice shelf is shown in the dark gray here. And the catchments are outlined with different colors, just to kind of indicate the different parts that are draining into these ice shelves. And the data that we have from this is shown on this map. And we divided it up into two parts. The Agrias et al. Paper focused on the tills, onshore tills that we collected, and then the paper that Trevor's actually working on now focuses on these offshore cores right off the Ronnie Filchner ice shelf. And so you can see that there's a significant amount of variation in the sources along this ice shelf, where there's more of the sort of Grenville green colors and red Ross Pan-African colors on the east side, and there is a substantial amount of this light pink West Antarctica stuff on the western side of this ice shelf. And so if we look at that on a histogram, this top one is the Filchner Trough and Coachland, and looks a lot like the diagram I showed you at the beginning, where there's a peak in this sort of young age, a little bit less than 200 million. And then there's a big peak around 500 million, and another sort of broad peak around 1 billion. And then in the central trough area, we're only seeing really the sort of 500 million years. And then in the Ronnie Trough area, we're seeing much less of the 500 million. We're seeing a lot more young stuff, and these are significantly younger than 200 million in general. So they're more like West Antarctica. And then we're also seeing a broad, older Grenvillian ages in there. And this is important because you remember I showed that the ice streams are not coming from exactly the same place throughout. So this gives us a possibility of being able to kind of sequence what parts of the Weddell Sea sector might have been decaying first in the sequence. So this is at 25,000 years. This is that movie I showed you, and you can see a couple of ice streams bringing stuff into the ocean. And again, this would be the Filchner signal that we would expect to see in the marine sediment cores. And if we look at the present day ice flow lines, those are shown in these dotted or dashed blue lines through here. We can see that we can sort of see where the signals that we're picking up in the pies might be coming from. But we also did down core measurements from these cores, and we find that we don't get the same composition of sediments in the different layers. So it's the very close to the top, and then this is the subglacial till at the bottom of the core. And then if we look at the foundation ice streams. We see that the top looks a lot more like the foundation ice stream, but the subglacial till actually doesn't have very much of that young material in it. So it looks like it has a significantly different source. And in particular, that really young stuff we think must be related to the more deep interior coming from West Antarctica. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the expedition that we went on for 382 to Iceberg Alley, and particularly focusing on that termination, the one that Mike Weber had done the detailed ice counting. In fact, this bottom diagram here is his ice rafted detritus signal. And then this red curve is the magnetic susceptibility. So high magnetic susceptibility is more terrigenous or silty material, and lower magnetic susceptibility is more biosilica rich. And then the sort of less densely populated counts on this middle diagram are our discrete sample counts from the different holes from site U1537. And this blue curve is U1537A that was counted by Mike on the ship. And the other three are, there's yellow is A, the gray is D, and the orange is C, but they're all counted on discrete samples. So that they're just, a 20-gram sample was taken, 20 cc sample was taken, and the sample was sieved, and then we counted the grains. So there will be more grains in the X-rays than there will be in our samples. And then this top diagram just shows how the three holes are sort of correlated to each other in depth. And then the important thing is the composition of the ice rafted detritus. So the pie diagrams on here show the measured hornblende argon-argon ages through this interval. And so you can see that there's a substantial amount of East Antarctica, particularly here in this sort of very early part of the record. But in the interval of the abundant ice rafted detritus at the termination, we end up seeing a much more substantial amount of West Antarctica than we were expecting to see. So we've been following up on this, and we've got a lot more data now across this interval from, right, you see hole D, we stopped here, but we now actually have data from hole D across this whole interval and have more hornblende ages. And we still see a substantial West Antarctica contribution, but we're realizing that we have to do a lot more work to more thoroughly correlate these to each other, and also to get as much hornblende data as possible in order to really be able to sequence the timing of these different geological contributions to the ice rafted detritus. So here's a ice rafted detritus count from the extended hole D from U1537, and you can see that we have a lot more structure, higher resolution, so therefore a lot more structure across this interval from hole D. Okay, so then I just want to show a couple of other things going kind of back in time from these. This is the overview chart from our expedition, showing the age on the x-axis here. Bottom is just a reference for the Lisecki and Ramo benthic isotope stratigraphy. The top is the geologic time scale with the geomagnetic polarity time scale in the black and white bar. And then this is depth in each of the sites on the y-axis. And so 1537, the core I was just showing you, is shown in this sort of purple color, and 1536, which is really nearby to that, is in the red color. These are extraordinarily well correlated to each other, as I'll show you. And then just a little farther north from there, and this is called the Dove Basin, in the Peary Basin, just a little bit north, all three in the Scotia Sea. We have another site, U1538. So these are the three sites that we've got emerging ice rafted detritus data from. And the first thing I'm going to show you is a sort of a very distinctive layer that we saw when we took the core from 1538. And you can see in this photograph on the right, this is a centimeter scale. You can see that there's a distinctive sort of gray layer within a sort of a lighter colored interval, and that there's abundant sort of larger grains embedded within there. So we did a lot of work on that. A lot of work to both correlate it into the better constrained stratigraphy of the Dove Basin sites, and also we did a lot of additional studies with the CT scanning to look at the three-dimensional architecture within the core. And this was published by Ian Bailey and others back in 2022. So again, the 1536 and 1537 are the yellow sites right here, and then 1538 is just a little bit to the north. All of them are in Iceberg Alley. And this is the results we got from this layer. So remember, East Antarctica is typically 400 million and above, and West Antarctica is reliably 150 million and below. There's an interval between around 150 million and 400 million. That's a little, it could come from either one, and so it's not as diagnostic, but things that are down around 100 million definitely came from West Antarctica, and things that are older than 450 million definitely came from East Antarctica. So you can see here that this site, or this IRD sample, is very strongly West Antarctic provenance dominated. And then just reminding ourselves about the distribution of ages. This little inset shows sort of how the currents might be moving the ice rafted detritus up to this site. And then we've got the pink West Antarctica colors here on the west side. The one thing that you'll notice is that there's not pies along this east side of the Antarctic Peninsula. And that's because we really haven't been able to get great samples of that because of the sea ice. But the geology of those is going to be very similar to the geology on the west side of the Antarctic Peninsula. So it should be pink, whether it comes from the west side or the east side. And then we've got these sort of mix of mostly much older ages in the sort of bottom of the Weddell Sea and up along the Droning Maudland coast. So the data suggests we're getting the ice rafted detritus from over here on the western side, as opposed to the East Antarctica side of the Weddell Sea. And then another kind of cool example, and if anybody was here in 2021, I did show this also, comes from U1536, from down in the Miocene, approximately 6 million year old sample. We found a green sandstone that's a drop stone, and it's really beautiful. Two big chunks. It takes up on the order of 20 centimeters total in the core. So it was a big stone. And then trying to scratch our heads and think about where it came from, we contacted Anne Gruneau at the Polar Rock Repository, and she said, well, maybe it comes from the crash site group in the Ellsworths. So these red bubbles here are the location of the crash site group in the Ellsworth. And this is a photograph of samples of the Wyatt Earp formation of the crash site group in the Ellsworth. And hopefully you'll agree that these are pretty similar looking, both in the scale and color of the rock. So we think that this chunk of rock that we found in the late Miocene is from the Wyatt Earp formation of the crash site group in the Ellsworth Mountains. Notice how deep into the white these spots are from where this comes. And I think this is a really key piece of evidence for one of the things that must be happening when we get abundant ice rafted detritus in Iceberg Alley. I think that the Filchner-Ronne ice shelf has to be almost completely gone. And so I think it means that there are big changes in the position of the ice shelf. On top of that, my colleague Christine Sidaway sailed on Expedition 379 from the Amundsen Sea. In fact, we ran into them in Punta Arenas. We switched off from there. They drilled 2 sites off the Amundsen Sea, and the first summer after we collected the green sandstone, I had a summer intern working on trying to measure its uranium-lead detrital zircons to diagnose where it came from. And we were at University of Arizona, and Christine was also there, and she was so excited because she had also found, not as big as ours, but she'd also found a bunch of little chunks of green sandstone on the other side of the West Antarctic margin. And so this movie that I'm about to show here comes from Ruthie Halberstadt, who was one of the scientists that sailed on Expedition 379. So she was focusing her sort of emphasis on what we could say from 379, but you can see that 382 is also located pretty close by, and what Ruthie's done also applies to what we can see. And what she's done is try to put geology into the sort of numerical ice sheet model to predict what the geology would be in the ice rafted detritus that you see. So the yellow is Marie Byrd Land down here. The orange is the Ellsworth Whitmore Mountains. That's important for us because that's the green sandstone. The green is Ellsworth Land. The turquoise is the Pensacola Mountains and Coates Land. That's up in the Weddell Sea area, and the sort of bright blue is the Antarctic Peninsula. So when I run this, there's going to be a little bar that shows up. Can you see it moving? This vertical bar is following the sea level estimate from the modeling. And so this is started at about 4,500 kiloyears, or 4.5. This is a Pliocene study. It's going to go through the Pliocene, and you can see the ice sheet going way out and then flowing way back in. And if you watch here, right as it goes across this this big sea level high, it just basically disappears, right? You see the ice go away and then come back during this lower sea level. Here it goes across another high sea level, goes away. I'll leave this PowerPoint with Mike so you can explore it. But this is like a phenomenal effort to put together the climatic evidence, what would be predicted for the ice sheet, and for my purpose, even better, what would be the geology under the ice that would have been eroded to the margin or flowed to the margin. And then the other thing that we have to take into account is when the ice sheet is in a different configuration, it could actually change the wind pattern and even the ocean circulation. And in particular, one of the things that we worried about is that if the ice sheet is in its minimum configuration, that there could be a seaway between the Weddell Sea and the Amundsen Sea. So you see here the open ocean is yellow. You can see that there's actually a path between the Weddell Sea and the Amundsen Sea without going around the Antarctic Peninsula from that. And so one of the questions is, what would the surface currents do? And therefore, what would the icebergs do in that scenario? And so this was just looking at what the wind patterns would be like. And at least to a first order, it appears that the wind patterns wouldn't have changed so much. And so it looks like there is a chance that in the case that the seaway was open, if the icebergs are too big, they're not going to go through that because it would be shallow water. But there's a chance that they could pass through from the Weddell Sea into the Amundsen Sea, and therefore maybe on the Amundsen Sea side they could actually see East Antarctica in their ice rafted detritus. Okay, and then this is just the record that we have from the Doug Austin. This was published by Brendan Riley, who's the director of the Lamont Core Repository now, and was a student at Oregon State when we sailed on Expedition 382. And this is really a phenomenal set of very exciting that we were able to get such an amazing record. So the blue curves in all of these are from U-1536, and the red curves are from U-1537. So this is the natural gamma radiation. So high gamma radiation, high terrigenous, and low. You can see that there's a really a strong correlation between the two. And then on panel C, Brendan has put them together, adjusted the depth scale for U-1536 to be coincident with the depths to correlate as best as possible with 1537. And then panel D is what he calls the stack. So he's taken the two curves, correlated them as best as possible, and then taken the sort of average record from those two. And then the bottom set of panels doing the same thing. Blue is 1536, red is 1537. He's put the two of them together on the mutual depth scale. And then this is the magnetic reversal stack from the two records. So you can see that there's really very clean, beautiful magnetic reversal stratigraphy. So the time scale is really well known from the magnetic stratigraphy for these sites. And we have a continuous record going back to through the entire Pleistocene, slightly into the Pliocene. Beyond the late Pliocene, we have some record, but it's not a continuous record older than the latest Pliocene. But if we look at the data that we have in progress with the hornblende provenance, I've just basically this is biased by the fact that people are doing specific studies, attacking specific questions, and so these are not just randomly selected samples through these intervals in the cores. They're selected for different purposes, and that may bias the results. But I've basically taken all of the data we've collected for samples that are less than 500,000, between 500,000 and 1.5 million, between 1.5 and 2.5 million, and older than 2.5 million. And these are the sort of lead people that are working on these various time intervals from 1537. And I've taken the liberty of actually adding these dashed lines and labeling these with the broad sources. So APIS stands for Antarctic Peninsula Ice Stream, Ice Sheet. WAIS stands for West Antarctic Ice Sheet, and EIAS stands for East Antarctic Ice Sheet. And I think you can see that there's a pattern of increasing contributions from the West Antarctic ice sheet and Antarctic Peninsula as you go from the early Pliocene, into the latest time frame. And it's interesting. Do you see green coming up on my? I'm somehow adding green lines to my. Uh,
Yeah, the green lines are growing.
I don't know whether I'm doing it or not. I'm not able to do it on demand, so maybe somebody else is. Anyway,
That'll be
um,
phytoplankton.
the phytoplankton are coming out. Anyway, it's really kind of an intriguing result, and it's definitely still work in progress, but it really does look like we're seeing some substantial changes through time. This is related work from a postdoc, Ching Wang, who's been studying an old IODP or ODP site 693, and she's looked in the interval between in the sort of mid-Pleistocene transition interval. And we have a very large number of analyses, 1,685, more than we have for anything else. And you can see there's a very strong dominance of this orange and red colors at 693, but there's also other East Antarctica ages in there as well. And if we compare that to the same time interval from U1537, we can see that we've got, a contribution from that, but it's very, very different. We're seeing and 1537, by the way, it's off the map over here to the left, but we're seeing we're not seeing a dominance of droning maudland in the ice rafted detritus provenance from U1537. And then if we look at those same pies again, this is against Claire Jasper has published a paper using AI to do the X-ray counts for the entire record of 1536 and 1537. And this is her record from 1537. And you can see that there's a lot more variability and a lot higher abundance of ice rafted detritus in the last 400,000 years than there was in the previous record. But we can also see some interesting structure within the record. So relatively low in the early part of the record, in the sort of 1.8 to 1.2 million year interval, we see a broad, relatively high interval, and then we see another kind of relatively lower interval prior to the sort of big late Pleistocene variability, and it, it to a first approximation, we're thinking that there may be a correspondence between how abundant the ice rafted detritus is and whether we're seeing, the proportions that we're seeing of East and West Antarctic. It doesn't show as well in here, but we're thinking that it looks like there's more West Antarctica in the samples that have less ice rafted detritus in them. Anyway, this is work in progress. If you invite me back in 3 years, maybe we'll be closer to the right answer. Really, the tip of the iceberg in terms of harnessing the record that we can potentially get from here. But we got a big West Antarctica ice signal across termination 1. The big West Antarctic ice signal at Iceberg Alley is seen throughout the middle to late Pleistocene, and we see a minimum in the East Antarctic ice components in the mid-Pleistocene interval, and Claire Jasper and Ching Wang are both working on projects that are going to further test, how this is working in terms of abundance of ice rafted detritus, environmental conditions, and the provenance of the ice rafted detritus. But in general, there's a dominance of East Antarctica before 1.5, but a growing West Antarctica contribution after 1.5 million. And then, this is obviously, I've been talking about a batch of data that's been collected by a whole bunch of people in collaboration. And it's been a really great opportunity to work with these guys. All right, let me
Thank you
stop.
very much.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Where's your research funding coming from? And are there implications in the recent presidential elections for the work that you're doing?
Um, my funding for this is coming from Antarctic Polar Programs from National Science Foundation, and uh, it hasn't hit yet, but the expectation is there that this could be a rough patch for people in academics in general, and
Yeah.
particularly people that are studying climate change.
Yeah. My next question is, how do you determine the drainage divides among the various watersheds, ice watersheds?
Yep. That's a really good question. And that's not, I didn't do it, but there's there's a lot of radar measurements around Antarctica that they use to sort of look at the layers and stuff like that. And in addition to that, they actually have I think they're using GPS to and INSAR and things like that to sort of map the flows. They're using a lot of satellite uh, techniques to study how the ice is flowing, but the thickness of the ice and the sort of pattern of layers within the ice are also part of the evidence that they use to put together that the flow lines.
Yeah, it impresses me the amount of fun you must have in just gathering data and doing the raw science. It's cool. I think your findings partly come from the tools that you've got and wherever it
Exactly.
leads you. Yeah.
It's true. I run an argon geochronology lab, and so I've definitely, you look for projects that you can, contribute to, but this is really, it really has been extraordinarily fun. I have to say that it's like it's a little bit like the geology of the world, a little bit smeared out, but
Yeah.
it's really a fun way to look at geology.
Did I have a question? I see that Mike Kaplan was involved,
He was, yeah, yeah. So,
and
yeah, Mike has given a few of these too, right?
he's given many, yes.
Yeah,
And
uh,
he talked about beryllium dating.
yeah. So Mike has been working in James Ross Island for a long time. And he might some of his beryllium dating may have even come from there. He's done a lot of work, and he has a good team of collaboration with the Argentine scientists.
Right.
And so his role in this project, we're really trying to, create a regional picture of what's going on in the Weddell Sea embayment and in this early Pleistocene interval. And Mike has been working on deposits on James Ross Island that are glacial deposits interlayered with marine deposits and volcanics. And so we've been dating the volcanics. There's also some shells that he's collected that we've got some strontium isotope dating on, and so it's close enough to coincident with this interval that we're studying in the marine sediment record that the ultimate goal is to is to have a mutual picture of what's the environment based on land records in James Ross Island, and what do we see offshore in Expedition 382 samples.
I know that the beryllium dating can give an indication of when there have been glaciations and
Yeah,
glaciations have disappeared. I was wondering whether there's any correlation with what you're seeing in the
yeah. So
sediment deposits.
yeah, for the last termination, I think there would be a way. In fact, by the way, that animation that I showed from Gallage et al. Is it's a numerical simulation, but it's strongly grounded in on land observations. And so for that last glacial that 25,000 to zero, there's a lot of cosmogenic isotope measurements that go into the position, dating the position of moraines from the ice margin. And so it definitely for that sort of shorter time scale interval, there's an overlap and in sort of how we think about the margins of the ice. But going back to this deeper time interval that we're working on right now, where that Mike's a participant in, it's a little on the old side for using the beryllium-10
That's what I
measurement.
thought. Thank you. Additional questions? Marion.
I have a very, very fuzzy memory, and I'm so sorry, of a study done on a potential passageway in the peninsula there. And they were looking at an organism that
Oh
had
yeah,
two different genetic
Oc-
streams. And then,
octopus, I think.
okay, yes, I
Yeah,
think you're right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
did that study seem to correlate with the potential break that you had been showing us?
Yeah, I think it's that's a good question. I forgot to mention it. I think that's entirely related. Actually, CD Hillenbrand, who was on, one of our collaborators on the wet LC stuff, was one of the people that was working on that and wanting to expand on that. They, for some reason that's unapparent to me, they weren't able to get that funded.
Oh dear.
I know it's really weird. It seems like so like not only exciting, but also everybody could get it, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, but they I think they tried a couple of times and weren't able to get funding to follow up on that. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was octopus DNA and had to do with the how long the populations on the either side of the peninsula had been isolated from each other.
Yes.
And it was really to look at with the most recent time that it's estimated that the ice was far enough back to allow an opening is stage marine isotope stage 5e. So that's about 120,000 years ago. And then I think the before that there's a lot of a question about exactly when it would have been open or not. But during that Pliocene interval, the sort of that where you could see it going in
Yeah.
Ruth model, you could see it just basically completely disappearing. I think it's widely accepted that it would have been open multiple times during the Pliocene, and maybe MIS5E is not as dramatic as marine isotope stage 11. So it seems like if it was open in 5E, it ought to have been open in stage 11 as well. And I don't remember the outcome of the sort of DNA isolation estimates from that, but my feeling is that it's growing to be pretty accepted that it was probably open 120,000 years ago.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. We have time for one more question.
Mike, I have a question for you. I don't know if how this relates, but Maureen and Chuck Ramo did a wonderful book on the geology of the Northeast, and I was looking at Amazon, and I gather she's still working with you. And what's the situation? I don't know how to ask it. What's the situation there?
Yeah, so Mo is a professor in the same department as I'm in, and she was the other co-chief scientist actually on Expedition 382. And her student Claire Jasper is the one that did the AI counting. It was Claire very much owns it now, but it was Mo's vision to use AI to get a full record of the ice rafted detritus. Um, and so yeah, she's very active still. She was our director for 2 or 3 years, up until like maybe 2 years ago or something like that. But now she's back to regular research and teaching stuff.
Cool.
Okay, thank you very much for an extremely interesting talk.
All right. Well, thank y'all for your patience.
And next month's Earth to Class is going to be dealing with a quite different topic. We'll be dealing with hurricanes.
Whoa. Warmer.
Should be fun.
All right. Thank y'all very much. It was really
Okay,
nice.
thank you. I'm getting
All
some
right.
nice
Thank
comments
you.
in here.
Take care.
Everybody's
Thank you.
thanking you.